Welcome to another episode of PBL Pod. So I want you to imagine uh, being at the absolute apex of global fame. You're completely rewriting the rules of your industry. You're shattering sales records, and you are literally paving the way for a worldwide cultural wave that will just alter the global music landscape forever.
Right, you're on top of the world.
Exactly. For all intents and purposes, you are untouchable. And then imagine finding out you've been fired from that job. Not in a closed-door boardroom meeting, not from your boss directly, but by scrolling on your phone and reading about your own termination in a news headline.
It sounds incredibly dystopian, honestly,
Yeah.
like a cautionary tale about corporate overreach, but it's actually a very real piece of modern music history.
Yeah, it really is.
Today, for this deep dive, we are looking at the story of 2NE1, which is the South Korean girl group formed by YG Entertainment back in 2009. We're talking about four members, Bohm, CL, Dara, and Minzy, who fundamentally altered the trajectory of global pop music.
And to you listening, even if your daily playlist doesn't include a single K-pop track, you have absolutely witnessed the genre's global takeover over the last decade. But to understand the mechanics of how we arrived at this current landscape, you really have to understand 2NE1.
Oh, absolutely. They were the catalyst.
They were the wrecking ball. They took the global perception of K-pop as this highly manufactured cookie-cutter pop machine, and they transformed it into a vehicle for edgy, genre-bending, female empowerment.
They completely flipped the script.
Right. But to understand that disruption, we kind of have to look at what they were actually disrupting. I always think of their arrival like a punk band crashing a very polite beauty pageant. So before we get into their meteoric rise and that really dramatic fall, what was the polite pageant? Like, what were the structural rules of K-pop prior to 2009?
Well, if we look at the industry landscape at that time, particularly for girl groups, it was an incredibly rigid binary. You essentially had two highly monetizable lanes, and that was it. Pretty much, yeah. You were either marketed as hyper cute and innocent, which was, designed to appeal to a specific protective demographic, or you were marketed as hyper sexy, which was aimed squarely at the general male gaze.
Okay, so a very narrow tightrope to walk.
Exactly. The industry was notoriously risk-averse. They had found these two formulas that worked reliably to sell merchandise and secure advertising deals, and there was very little room for deviation. Like rebellion, heavy hip-hop influence, unapologetic swagger that was an entirely different financial model reserved almost exclusively for boy bands.
So you're saying the entire market was essentially built on approachability and, frankly, subservience. Like, women in K-pop at that time were designed to be looked at, not necessarily to be intimidating or powerful.
Yes, the power dynamic was heavily skewed. So when YG Entertainment began teasing a new group, they didn't use the standard marketing playbook at all. They literally dubbed them the female Big Bang.
Oh, wow. Which is a massive statement.
Huge. Because Big Bang was their massively successful, heavily hip-hop influenced boy group. They were known for writing their own music and having this massive, swaggering stage presence.
That is a really fascinating strategic move. By calling them the female Big Bang, YG is basically signaling to the market that they are breaking that binary.
Right, they're tearing it up. And actually, they originally intended to name the group 21, but after realizing another singer held that name, they pivoted to 2NE1. It's pronounced to anyone or 21, and it stands for 21st Century New Evolution.
I love that name.
It fits perfectly, because their foundational mission was to introduce a concept called girl crush.
And girl crush is a term you hear everywhere in modern K-pop now.
Oh, everywhere. But in 2009, it was a massive financial risk. The concept focuses entirely on female empowerment, independence, and defying traditional Korean female stereotypes.
So they weren't aiming for the male gaze anymore.
Not at all. The target demographic was other women. They weren't singing about pining after a boy who didn't notice them. They were singing about being the absolute best in the room, dominating the space, and just not needing anyone's permission to do so.
Okay, wait, I have to challenge this premise a bit. Just based on the sources. We're talking about them as these massive disruptors, right? The punk band crashing the pageant. But the sources also show that 4 years of intense, highly structured training went into this group before they ever debuted.
Yes, the trainee system is brutal.
Right, so this wasn't some grassroots movement formed in a garage. This is a highly capitalized entertainment agency designing a specific product. So my question is, if a corporation mandates rebellion, is it actually rebellion? Or is it just a very smart market pivot by YG to capture an entirely new underserved demographic?
That is, I mean, that's the brilliant paradox at the heart of 2NE1. Yes, it was a top-down corporate strategy. YG absolutely recognized a market inefficiency. There were millions of young women who wanted to see themselves reflected as powerful, not just pretty.
They saw dollar signs in empowerment.
Sure, but here's the critical distinction. While the framework was corporate, the execution was authentic. The attitude, the vocal delivery, the sheer charisma that CL, Minzy, Dara, and Baum brought to the table, you just can't manufacture that in a boardroom. The agency built the vehicle, but the artists themselves were the engine.
That makes a lot of sense. The blueprint doesn't matter if the execution falls flat. So how did they actually execute that initial strike into the market?
Their first appearance was actually a strategic soft launch in March 2009. They featured on a promotional track called Lollipop alongside Big Bang.
Wait, wasn't that for a cell phone commercial?
Yes, an LG cell phone ad. And because it was an ad, it completely bypassed the traditional promotional gauntlet of music shows, yet it still became a massive hit. It primed the public. But the real structural disruption came 2 months later, in May 2009, with their official debut track, Fire.
Fire. Produced by Teddy Park, who is obviously a legendary figure in K-pop production. And looking at the mechanics of this song from the deep dive sources, this is where the genius really lies. Teddy didn't just give them a standard pop track with edgy lyrics. He fundamentally altered the sonic architecture.
He really did. Fire was heavily infused with hip-hop, aggressive synthesizers, and most surprisingly, reggae.
Reggae. In 2009, K-pop.
Right. At that time, critics literally referred to the mainstream Korean market as a barren land for reggae. It simply wasn't done, especially not by a rookie girl group trying to establish a new fan base. They dropped 2 versions of the music video, a space version and a street version, and they hit 2 million views in 24 hours.
Which is insane. You have to keep the context of 2009 in mind, before streaming was what it is today.
Yeah.
Those numbers were astronomically high.
Unbelievable numbers for a debut.
It's like their musical versatility wasn't just a chameleon blending into its environment. It was more like a Trojan horse. They used these familiar high-gloss pop visuals to sneak highly experimental genres like heavy synth and reggae straight into the mainstream. You think you're just consuming a catchy pop track, but structurally, they're feeding you something entirely subversive.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
And they doubled down on that Trojan horse strategy. In July, they released their first EP featuring a track called I Don't Care. This one dialed back the aggressive hip-hop and leaned into a medium-tempo R&B combined with reggae melodies again.
So it's showing a slightly softer side.
Visually and sonically softer, yes, but the lyrical content was still fiercely independent. It was essentially an anthem about brushing off a cheating partner, and it absolutely dominated the charts, becoming the most downloaded song of the year on the Bugs music platform in Korea.
Wow, most downloaded of the year. But the real testament to how deeply this Trojan horse infiltrated the industry is what happened during award season, right? In their debut year, they won Song of the Year for I Don't Care at the Mnet Asian Music Awards, commonly known as MAMA.
Yeah, we have to pause and explain just how structurally improbable that is for our listeners.
Please do.
In K-pop, winning a Daesang or grand prize isn't just about having a catchy song on the radio. The criteria for these awards heavily weight physical album sales, broadcast points, and massive mobilized fan voting. Historically, it takes years to build the infrastructure of a fandom large enough to move those metrics.
Right, like the system is mathematically gatekept against rookies.
Yeah.
You literally shouldn't be able to win.
Exactly. Established legacy acts almost always take the grand prizes because of their accumulated fan power. But 2NE1 bypassed that entirely. They became the first idol group in history to win a Daesang in their debut year.
That's incredible.
They simply brute forced the system through sheer, undeniable general public consumption. And they didn't coast on that victory either. By 2010, with their first full-length album, To Anyone, they became the first artists ever to sweep all 3 major Mema Daesangs, Artist of the Year, Album of the Year, and Best Music Video.
So they effectively conquer the industry in record time. Just imagine achieving the highest possible career honor in your very first year on the job. Where do you even go from there? Do you coast or do you push harder?
Well, 2NE1 pushed harder.
They really did, because they didn't just stay in the musical lane, they start weaponizing their aesthetics. The sources note how their style became just as influential as their music. We were talking about Moschino, Alexander Wang, Gringo Bilmain, Jeremy Scott.
High fashion.
Right. But it wasn't just about wearing expensive brands. It was about how they wore them.
Right. Yes, fashion became a tool for intimidation and dominance for them. Again, going back to the industry standard of approachability, girl groups were styled to look pretty, soft, and accessible. To anyone brought aggressively high fashion, heavy spikes, studded leather, and bold, dark makeup into their music videos.
They weren't dressing to be desired, they were dressing to command attention.
Precisely. And the hairstyles, they completely rejected standard beauty norms. You had CL sporting what the media called bullhorn hair.
Oh man, the bullhorn hair. And Dara had this famous gravity-defying palm tree hair. And later, she had a style that was literally named Vegeta hair after the Dragon Ball Z character.
Yeah, it was architectural, it was audacious. They were essentially daring the industry to look away.
And that visual audacity was matched by an increasingly unpredictable musical output. Like, they refused to settle into a single sonic DNA. Look at their 2011 hit, I Am the Best.
Yeah.
It's a massive, pulsating electro house anthem that is essentially 4 minutes of pure ego and swagger.
An absolute classic.
Right. That track won MTV Iggy's Best New Band Global Competition and landed them a live performance in New York City's Times Square.
Which was a massive deal for K-pop crossover at the time. But then, right when the industry thinks they have 2NE1 pegged as this loud, aggressive electro house group, they pivot entirely. They release Lonely, which is a completely stripped-down, acoustic, raw track exposing immense vulnerability.
Just keeping everyone on their toes. And then, my personal favorite example of their audacity, they release I Love You.
Oh, I Love You is a masterpiece of bizarre engineering. They mixed pulsating Eurodance with traditional Korean trot music.
Which, for our listeners who might not know the mechanics of trot, is basically the equivalent of mixing Daft Punk with classic country music like Dolly Parton.
That is the perfect analogy.
Trot is characterized by this very specific vocal inflection, a strict two-beat rhythm. It's nostalgic, older generation music. Sticking that inside a futuristic Eurodance track is frankly insane.
Yeah.
On paper, it should be a mess, but they made it a massive hit.
And that agility is what made them a global force.
Huh.
Between 2012 and 2014, they scaled aggressively. They embarked on the New Evolution Global Tour in 2012, which was the very first world tour by a K-pop girl group.
The very first.
Yeah. Their Los Angeles show ranked on the Billboard box score with over $650,000 in ticket sales. The New York Times named their New Jersey stop the second best concert of the year.
And they were building bridges with Western artists, too, recording in L.A. and London with Will.i.am from the Black Eyed Peas, pushing tracks like Take the World On. They were meticulously laying the groundwork for a global crossover.
All of which culminated in the 2014 Crush era. Their second and final Korean studio album made history. It became the first album by a Korean artist to break into the top 100 on the U.S. Billboard 200 chart.
The first ever.
First ever. It set a record for the highest charting K-pop album that held unbroken for 2 solid years. Rolling Stone ranked it among the best pop albums of 2014, placing it right alongside heavyweights like Taylor Swift.
Okay, I want to pause here and really look at the business mechanics, because this is where the story hits a massive contradiction in the sources. Let's look at the balance sheet. They had the biggest album. They have the biggest tour. The sources indicate they earned over $23 million in just the first half of 2014 alone.
Astronomical numbers.
Right. They're an undeniable golden goose for YG Entertainment. But then, right at this absolute peak, everything stops. We see a sudden, screeching 2-year hiatus. So, from your perspective looking at the industry, why would any corporation willingly halt a machine generating that much capital?
It's baffling from the outside, but to understand that halt, you have to look beyond the immediate revenue and look at the cold, structural economics of the idol life cycle. In K-pop, there is a phenomenon often referred to as the 7-year curse.
The 7-year curse.
Right. Standard exclusive contracts typically last for 7 years. When a highly successful group approaches that renewal period, the leverage shifts. The artists rightfully demand a much higher split of the revenue. Suddenly, your massive profit margins as an agency start to compress.
Ah, okay. So if you're a corporate entity, you're looking at an aging asset that is about to become significantly more expensive to maintain. And concurrently, YG Entertainment is already preparing to launch their next-generation girl group, Blackpink, who operate on rookie contracts with much higher margins for the agency.
Exactly. From a purely cynical corporate perspective, it becomes a question of resource allocation. Why pour millions into marketing a veteran group with a less favorable revenue split when you can shift those resources to a younger, cheaper group that you completely control?
Wow.
So, following the Crush peak, group activities essentially ceased. The members were left to pursue solo endeavors. Dara started acting, Minzy opened a dance academy, CL was pushing for a U.S. solo debut. Aside from one surprise performance at the 2015 MMA Awards, the group was just silenced.
Which leads to the collapse.
Oh, right.
In April 2016, YG confirms that Minzy is leaving the group, and by November 2016, the agency officially announces that 2NE1 is disbanding. They release one final acoustic goodbye track in early 2017, penned by CL to Minzy, and that's supposedly the end of the story.
But this is where the nuance of the story becomes incredibly important for our listeners, because the official PR narrative and the reality of the artists violently clash here.
They really do.
At the time of the disbandment in 2016, YG Entertainment issued statements framing the decision as mutual. They claimed it was the result of, quote, long discussions with the remaining members, painting a picture of an amicable, natural conclusion to the group's life cycle.
Now, I understand the corporate logic of margin compression and shifting resources that we just talked about, but there is a massive leap between deciding not to renew a contract for financial reasons and locking the artists out of the castle so abruptly that they find out via the media.
Yeah, it's brutal.
And that is the part of the source material that feels genuinely punitive. We want to remain impartial on the management dispute itself, but the facts are stark. In 2021, both CL and Minzy stated in interviews that they were entirely unaware of their own disbandment until they saw the media reports online.
Just scrolling their phones and seeing they've been fired, it's a stark revelation. And looking at the sources impartially, without taking sides, you really cannot ignore the massive public backlash this caused. When fans realized the discrepancy between the long discussion's PR spin and the artist's actual lived experience, it triggered significant anger against the agency for mismanagement.
I mean, can you imagine dedicating your youth to building an empire, only to be locked out without even a phone call?
It highlighted the deepest tension in the highly manufactured pop industry, which is who actually holds the power. For years, the answer seemed to be the corporation. They hold the trademarks, they hold the distribution networks, the physical contracts. They simply deleted 2NE1 from the active roster.
YG deleted them on paper, sure. But as we see in the later half of the sources, you cannot delete cultural influence. When you create a vacuum that massive, when you literally birth the girl crush movement and then suddenly disappear, the culture doesn't just forget you. Which brings us to the ultimate turning point of this deep dive. April 16th, 2022. The Coachella Valley Music and Arts Festival.
Oh, this gives me chills. It is arguably one of the most brilliant maneuvers in recent pop culture history. So, CL was officially booked on the Coachella lineup as a solo artist. The corporate structure was entirely bypassed here, but mid-set, the stage goes dark, the opening heavy synths of I Am the Best start playing, and 4 silhouettes appear on the main stage.
After 6 years of forced silence, all 4 members secretly organized and rehearsed entirely off the radar. They stepped out onto one of the biggest stages on the planet, completely circumventing the corporate machinery that disbanded them. The internet melted down.
It completely broke the internet.
It wasn't just a reunion. It was a hostile takeover of their own narrative.
It was a massive flex of organic power. And the sheer scale of the global reaction proved something critical. Their cultural capital hadn't diminished by a single fraction. In fact, the Coachella performance generated so much undeniable momentum that it forced the corporate machinery back to the negotiating table.
Because at the end of the day, capitalism responds to demand.
Precisely. Recognizing that 2NE1's legacy was bulletproof and, frankly, highly lucrative, YG Entertainment announced an official reunion in 2024. They organized the 15th anniversary Welcome Back tour.
And what were the actual mechanics of that return? Like, did the fans actually show up, or was it just, internet nostalgia that didn't translate to ticket sales?
Oh, they showed up in staggering numbers.
Yeah.
The tour drew over 250,000 fans across Asia and grossed $44 million.
Unbelievable.
It was an undeniable triumph that cemented their status, though the sources do note that right at the end of the tour in mid-2025, Bomb did have to take a temporary hiatus on medical advice to rest. But the central point was made loudly. The group was far bigger than the sum of its corporate parts.
And you can see their fingerprints on literally the entire modern K-pop ecosystem today.
The lineage is direct and undeniable. Groups like Blackpink, aespa, Twice, G-Idol, Baby Monster, Myov, the sheer volume of massive global acts that cite 2NE1 as their direct inspiration is staggering. 2NE1 normalized the girl crush concept.
They proved it worked.
Exactly. They proved that female acts didn't have to cater to the male gaze to be financially viable. They could cater to empowerment, intimidation, and complexity. As Han from the group Stray Kids commented in the sources, they literally defined a whole generation.
We started this deep dive looking at the tension of being at the absolute peak of your industry, only to be fired via a news headline. We watched a group act as a Trojan horse, sneaking rebellion into a rigid, polite pageant.
And what the timeline reveals is that 2NE1 wasn't just a music group, they were a systemic evolution. They were, for a time, discarded by the very corporate system they helped legitimize and enrich. But the culture they built was too structural, too foundational for any press release to erase. Their Coachella circumvention and massive 2024 tour proved that a true legacy is never decided by a boardroom.
It leaves you with a fascinating question to consider long after the music stops. When an artist completely outgrows the machinery that built them, who really owns their legacy? The corporation holding the trademark on a piece of paper, or the artists and fans who refuse to let the spirit die? Thanks for listening to People Pod. Keep tuning in for more stories worth knowing.